Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Today is another true crime video, and today we are going to talk about someone who, to my knowledge, is a little less famous. His name is Scott Tucker, and he was the CEO of a payday lending company. So, why do we care about Scott Tucker and his payday lending company? I first learned about him from a Netflix docuseries called Dirty Money. This docuseries is a little weird, I think in part because each episode was directed by a different director. So the tone changes a lot from episode to episode. The style, just everything. You know, like some have narrators, this one doesn't. So it's kind of a weird series, but it does cover a lot of different sort of white crimes. Some of them I don't know, or white collar crimes, sorry. Some of them I don't know fit the definition exactly, but this one does. So, I will say that episode on Scott Tucker, I first skipped it because it opens with a bunch of race cars and people talking about race car driving, which is, I thought it was going to be like race car crimes, which wasn't really what I was looking for. I don't know anything about race car driving, or cars for that matter, but that's not what his crime was. It was a white collar crime that had to do with giving out skeevy loans, among other things. And he just happened to be a race car driver. Well, he didn't happen to be one. He used the money, the bunches and bunches of money that he got from his scams, to become a race car driver, which is interesting. It's sort of like you can imagine him as a kid wishing to have this life to drive fast cars and race, and once he had all this money, he bought a $300,000 car and hired a trainer and bought a team and started racing. So when he was arrested in 2016, I think it probably was a big deal. Definitely in Kansas, it was a big deal. A lot of the news articles I saw were from local Kansas papers, but also in the world of racing, it was probably really weird. I don't know that he was like super good at racing. I think he was an amateur, but I think he did have a presence. His team had a presence in that community, so I'm sure it was this very odd news story of like race car driver arrested by FBI for many financial crimes. So I didn't hear about it because, again, I'm not in the race car scene. That's not something I've ever known anything about. But back to the documentary, his episode was particularly weird because he and his wife and his lawyer, who also got arrested, the wife didn't, as far as I know, they all agreed to be interviewed. His daughters too, who were just teenagers, and I think it was pretty exploitative to have them on there, but they all agreed to be interviewed, and the director juxtaposed interviews with Scott Tucker and his supporters with like the FBI and people who know about crimes. So it was like Scott Tucker's camp saying, the federal government ruined my life for no reason, and then like the FBI saying, here's all the crimes he committed. But with no narrator, it really did portray a very, very sympathetic view toward him, which again I found very strange. The tone of the whole thing was just very odd, because they also did interview victims of his fraud, people who were taken advantage of. So I don't totally know how to feel about this documentary. Yeah, that's where I'm gonna leave it. In general, the series, I think it is interesting. I like documentaries about white collar crimes, so that's not surprising that I'd recommend it. Okay, but in order to set up what his crime actually was and why it was sort of a big deal, why it fit into the broader culture in the US during this time, I want to go and talk about what payday lending is and how it was in the news in the lead up to him being arrested. So, payday lending. I don't know if payday lending exists outside of the United States. I actually have a feeling it probably doesn't for the most part. It's also referred to as predatory lending or like loan sharks, but legal. So payday lending in general is technically legal. It was not always, and it is not always still. So, why would that be? The United States has a history of regulating interest rates. So around the turn of the 20th century, there was a cap on how high interest rates could be, and that's where the original loan sharks came from. They were part of the mob for the most part, and they were people who were giving out illegal loans with much higher interest rates. Those loan sharks actually had much, much better interest rates than what legal payday lenders have now, or in 2015, 2016 when this was going on. So what happened was in the late 80s, early 90s, we deregulated a lot of things in the United States, including interest rate caps. So legal payday lenders were able to pop up and charge outrageous interest rates during this time. And you might wonder why anyone would agree to these horrible interest rates, which, as I'll talk about later, were often like 700%, things like that, and they could get even worse. And the reason is, unfortunately, there is a need for these loans. In the US, the banks don't give small loans to people. You can get a mortgage, you can refinance your house. There are bigger loans that you can get. But if you need a loan of like $300, which is what the majority of these payday loans are, a bank is not going to give it to you. So why would someone need a $300 loan? Many Americans live paycheck to paycheck. This is really common. In 2019, the Federal Reserve in America reported that over 40% of Americans couldn't afford a $400 expense. So, for example, your car breaks down, it's a $400 repair, and now your choices are to fix your car, which you need to go to work because there's no public transportation where you live, or pay rent. What do you do? And it's not like you have rich family members or, easy places to get loans from. So the Federal Reserve did a survey, I'm going to put up here, and people could respond with more than one. So the question was, what would you do if you had an unforeseen $400 expense? And you can see the answers here. So 45% of people answered that they would just pay out of their savings, so good for them, no problems there. Many people would use a credit card, either that they would be able to pay off pretty soon or that would take them time to pay off, but you can do that with a credit card. Some people just said they wouldn't be able to pay, which is interesting. 12% they just wouldn't pay, and I'm not sure what the options are there. Selling something, loan of credit, and then 2% of people said payday loan, deposit advance, or overdraft. So not a lot of people said payday loan, but a lot of people in the United States have taken out payday loans. They are common. In fact, they are so common that by 2008, after that deregulation of interest rates, there were more payday loan stores than there were McDonald's and Starbucks combined. Like I mentioned, the average amount borrowed it's actually $350, not $300. And I didn't explain exactly how payday loans work. Why are they called payday loans as opposed to just small loans? The reason is that they come due on payday, so usually after 2 weeks, and you're supposed to pay the entire loan back in full on payday. That's the idea. So instead of having like a 5% interest rate or whatever, people agreed to a flat fee, like $15 per $100 borrowed. So on your $300 loan, you're paying back $45. And again, that comes due in 2 weeks on payday. So it's just like a really fast term loan with a really, really terrible interest rate. If you don't pay it back in full, which many people can't, again, these are people who didn't have the $300, $400 in the first place. So the idea that they would have it, in 2 weeks is unlikely. They roll it over into a new loan, which it's not. It's the same loan, but that's what they call it. They roll it over into a new loan, and then you have new fees again. So it's basically like, and it depends on the terms of whatever your payday lender is, but it's basically like getting the same interest rate all over again. So if it was $45 for the first 2 weeks, it's $45 for the next loan. So you can see how this could result in really outrageous interest rates. It is not a friendly loan. It is absolutely a loan that is out to take you for all the money you don't have. And about half of payday loans are extended at least 10 times. So they really racked up those high fees. And that's exactly what the payday lenders wanted to have happen. That was the goal of the business. That was how it made money. It also made money because people would come right back and take out more payday loans because they just didn't have options. So they really depended on desperate people. Over time, this, Americans were beginning to grumble about this. It was becoming a bigger problem. Debt collectors were coming after people. By 2014, John Oliver had a segment on his TV show Last Week Tonight. So, he does those in-depth, jokey spiels about some terrible aspect of living in America. And so by 2016, which is when Scott Tucker got arrested, people were really fed up. Payday loans were in the news for a lot of reasons. A lot of it for scammy business practices or things people really didn't agree with, they really didn't appreciate. By 2016, more than 19 million American households had utilized payday lending services. So that is a big chunk of the population. A lot of Americans had gone into debt with these people. And an interesting aspect of the payday loan industry, in capitalism, the idea is often more competition breeds better service for the customer. This is actually the opposite when it comes to payday lending, because most payday lenders, they have a little storefront, they have people working there, and they have overhead costs, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And when there's more competition, there are fewer people who they are lending to. And some of those people will never pay back the money. They just won't. They don't do any diligence in determining if someone is capable of paying back a loan at all, because that's overhead that would cost money, and they just want as many borrowers as possible. So what happens is, if there are a lot of payday lenders, which there were mentioned previously, they have to keep raising interest rates to deal with their overhead costs, because they have fewer borrowers to pull from. Their pool of borrowers gets smaller with more competition. In addition to this, people who are taking out payday loans are often desperate, tired, overworked, stressed. They have a bill coming due that they have to pay, or they'll be homeless. So they're not in the best place to be shopping around for the best rate. they are going where they can to get this problem solved as soon as possible. This is also why you'll see a lot of scams involving like locksmiths. Any situation where people are desperate and sort of time sensitive, that's a place for scams to really proliferate, because you're getting people not at their best, not at their most wary, but in a vulnerable position. And payday lenders were aware of this. They actually wrote about it in their sort of guidelines for how to get the most money out of people. They cashed in, which again, by 2016, the general American consensus was this was scummy behavior that we were tired of. Some of the practices included, like I mentioned, approving people for loans who had no hope of paying them back, and just, destroying their credit, getting them stuck in this cycle of debt forever, having loan sharks coming after them, or creditors. What happens with debt in America often is if you don't pay it back, if the original lender doesn't think you are likely to pay it back, they sell your debt to someone else for pennies. Like, let's say you owe me $300 and I don't think you're ever going to pay that back. I will sell your debt to my friend here for $2 because I don't think I'm ever getting any money from you, and they think they'll probably get more than $2 from you. And then legally they can hound you for like the rest of your life to pay back that $300. So that was happening. That does happen. That's something that happens. Another practice they engaged in was requiring borrowers to give them access to their bank accounts. So what would happen was, on the payday or whenever the fees were due, they would go straight into the borrower's bank account and pull out money, whether or not they had that money. So they would cause overdraft fees. Overdraft fees, I assume, happen in other countries, but in case they don't, that's when, if you go into your bank and you have $4 there and you try to pull out $5, the bank will charge you some sort of fee for pulling out more money than you own. Sometimes those fees are pretty high, and the payday lenders were causing those fees for people who didn't have the money. So you're already in debt with the payday lender, and now they're causing you debt with your bank, which was just really skeevy. People did not like that. So in 2016, the Consumer Protection Agency decided to regulate. The Consumer Protection Agency was developed was after the 2008 stock market crash by Elizabeth Warren. So their job is to protect consumers, and there are limits as to what they are able to do, but they were able to stop certain practices and to legislate to say that you had to do some due diligence to see if people were able to pay back a loan, and they stopped the withdrawing from your own bank account. Payday lenders were no longer allowed to do that with the Consumer Protection Agency rules. Another key development was with the backlash to payday lenders that really started in the 2000s but ramped up by 2016, was that many states started banning payday lending. Now again, if you're not from the US, it can be easy to forget that we have multiple sets of laws in this country. So we have our federal laws that the whole country has to abide by, but we also have state laws which can have their own rules, just like we have state taxes and federal taxes. So in 2004, payday lending was legal in 44 states, so only 6 states had banned it. By 2016, payday lending was only legal in 36 states. So many states just said, like, no, we're done with this. It is predatory, it is bad for our citizens, it is not helping us. States also had different rules regarding payday lending. So for example, in Colorado, it was legal to an extent, but there were rules. The minimum term of a loan was 6 months, so that's not a payday loan. It's not, 2 weeks. The loan could not come due all at once. So again, that's different than a payday loan. They're saying you have 6 months to pay it back, and it has to be paid back in installments. You can't say it's all due at the same time. And they regulated permissible fees. So I don't know, I didn't look up exactly which fees they banned and said were okay, but they basically said you can't get people coming and going. You have to only have like these fees. They have to be upfront. This is how you do a loan in Colorado. And so getting it back to our criminal of the day, Scott Tucker, he broke a lot of state laws. And that is where some of his really interesting crimes come in, was how he tried to avoid getting punished for breaking state laws because he absolutely knowingly broke them. Okay, so let's bring it back to Scott Tucker. He was from Kansas. As I briefly mentioned, his business was based in Kansas. It was called AMG Services. There were a lot of different branches, with a lot of different names, like Loan, whatever, like Quick Cash, or I don't know, Cash Click, lots of different like payday lending type names. It is estimated that he earned like $380 million from this business. So he made a lot of money. He did well for himself in Kansas. And as I mentioned, he used this money to become a race car driver, so sort of live out his boyhood fantasies. The way that he was able to be so successful in this business was that he did it primarily online. So most payday lenders are brick and mortar stores. You'll find them in every strip mall or just down the street. There's one that's a couple blocks north of me. There might be one that's just down the street from that, actually. But he started his business in the early 2000s and found a new, larger market by going primarily online. So his business was more like, this online software, getting all the online stuff working, and then also a call center. For when people inevitably called in to complain for his really shady and skeevy business practices. However, in the United States, and I imagine elsewhere, just because a business is online doesn't mean you can ignore state laws. So if I have a business, in my state, but I am doing business with someone in Colorado, I still have to follow Colorado state law when I sell them whatever I'm selling them. Scott Tucker firmly did not believe in this, which is where the problems come in. All right, so let's get to his crimes. I'm going to start with the sort of boring stuff first. And mainly that was his predatory fees and the way that he presented his fees to people. So, the documentary series in Netflix actually does a really good job of breaking this down, for all that I think it's weirdly sympathetic to him. They do talk to victims who really also do a good job of presenting what happened to them and why it made them so angry. But basically, people would take out their loan and understand, okay, I'm going to pay, $500 on my $350 loan, fine. And I'm going to pay it back in a month. Got it. And then they would see money coming out of their account. And so they'd think, cool, I'm paying back my loan. And then they would learn that they hadn't paid back any part of their loan, actually. The payday lending company was just taking out fees for rolling over the loan. So this is really scummy. These people thought they were paying their loans. And the company, the reason this also rose the level of crime is the company knew that people had been misled. They misled them on purpose. Now it's hard to prove that in a court of law, but they did. Spoilers. Scott Tucker was arrested and convicted, and it was agreed in the court of law that he knowingly did this. And one way they knew that he did this was because they had instructions for their phone operators that basically showed them the entire scheme, that they planned to get at least $900 from every single person who took out a $300 loan. And the thing, this is just extra. On this little training sheet that someone printed out, they had a picture of a guy holding money bags, which again indicated that they knew it was a shady business practice meant to get as much money from people as possible. I do feel bad for the phone operators. They do have some recordings in the documentary, and they sound like they're going off a script, like they have the same conversation all day, every day. But of course the people calling in are angry and upset and desperate and furious, and if I had that job, I would have broken down in tears the first day and never gone back. Because they're telling people, no, you didn't pay off your loan, you paid us this fee, your loan is this, you owe us this much money still, you haven't paid back any part of your loan, and this is after they'd already taken like $300 from these people who didn't have it in the first place. So it was also funny looking at like news articles, because as they came out over time, as more information came out, the company was subpoenaed and a lot of research was done on their business practices. At first it was like they charged up to 400% interest, they charged up to 700% interest, and like the most recent one I saw was like they had 1,000% interest rates on these loans. So they really did everything they could to just suck people dry. Alright, so now we get to, why did Scott Tucker think he was going to get away with breaking states' laws? And the answer was Indian tribes. And I am going to call them Indian tribes. I think legally that is the legal term. I know Native American is the general term for people who are native to the USA, but legally, I believe that Indian tribe is the correct term. So what Scott Tucker did was he made a sham sale of his company to the Miami Indian tribe of Oklahoma for $120,000 while continuing to own and run his business. Again, this business made him $380 million, and he sold it for $120,000. Why would he do that? Well, Indian tribes in the US have sovereignty, which means that states cannot come after them for breaking laws. This is why you get things like casinos on reservations, or like Indian-owned casinos, because in states where gambling is illegal, Indian tribes are allowed to run their own casinos and make money that way. So that was the general idea behind this scheme. Unfortunately, or well, fortunately for us, for the country, this was still very illegal federally. The federal government absolutely can prosecute illegal businesses that are run by Indian tribes. But it also seems like the sale itself was fraud, because it was clearly fake. And there was a whistleblower in this part of the scheme. So Caroline Williams is a woman who worked for the fake CEO of the Indian tribe part of the business, and she realized it was all fraud. She was really upset by this. She was incensed, and she made audio recordings with her boss, and gave those audio recordings to, I guess, the FBI in the end. Very memorably, she says on her recording to her boss, whose name is Don, "Money can't buy ethics, Don." And he responded, "I don't even agree with you on that." To which she said, "Oh dear God." It was just I don't know, I was very charmed by her righteous outrage in this situation. She also mentioned, like, you know, Scott Tucker is using us like a piggy bank, which he was. Tribes got maybe 1% of the revenue of this business that they owned. The rest of it went straight to Scott Tucker, which I'm not totally clear on this, but I think that might have been part of the illegality as well, because it's unclear that the way the money was given to him was done in a legal way. It might have been like wire fraud, or I know someone got arrested for transporting money across state lines in a way that was super illegal. So it didn't even sound like it went to like his business accounts or anything. It just went to him, and that doesn't seem like the appropriate way to handle revenue from a business. So yeah, this part I think made the news, made it just seem like extra skeevy. And in the documentary, Scott Tucker took credit for this idea. He didn't on screen, right? Because that makes him seem extra guilty. But one of his friends in an interview is saying like, oh yeah, Scott Tucker came up with this idea and he was right and here's why. Except that he didn't come up with the idea. His sort of mentor, who also went to prison for illegal payday loan practices and this exact scheme, was the first one to sell his company to an Indian tribe. So it wasn't his idea. It was an idea he got from someone else, and in the end, it bit him in the behind. Okay, so how did Scott Tucker's empire fall? What caused him to get in trouble? That's actually pretty simple. There were a lot of consumer complaints made against this company, including people who realized they were in states where the loan they were given was illegal, and therefore his company collecting on that loan was also illegal. So they were like, I'm not going to pay this back. And of course they got hounded and harassed, more complaints. So the first legal consequence was a civil suit in 2012. And for a while, I think the company believed that they were only going to be in like financial trouble. I don't think that they understood there were going to be like criminal charges, but they were eventually subpoenaed in 2014, and in 2016 there were two separate cases, and it matters that these were done sort of separately. Scott Tucker and his lawyer that helped set up the Indian tribe scam, they were both indicted and arrested for illegal payday loans and racketeering. They, in the end, when it was all counted, exploited 4.5 million customers of the legal loans. That's more than 1% of Americans. There are like, I don't know, 380 million Americans, and so yeah, that's more than 1% of people in my country were exploited by one greedy dude in Kansas. His appeals for this, oh no, okay. So this was the criminal case. He was given over 16 years for this. I don't think he went away though until I don't think sentencing happened until 2018, 2019. So he has appealed. The appeal failed. For now, it does seem that he will be serving his full sentence in federal prison. It was the FBI who came after him. These were federal crimes. In 2016, in a separate case brought forth by the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission, he was ordered to pay a record $1.3 billion for deceiving consumers across the country and illegally charging them undisclosed and inflated fees. As of July 2020, this is still being appealed, and it looks like it's going to go to the Supreme Court. So this financial settlement for victims has not been fully settled. The argument now is whether the FTC has the authority to levy this kind of fine. It was the biggest fine in history they've ever tried to get. So that's, I guess, the sort of legal question that brings it to the Supreme Court. However, $505 million as of 2018 has already been sent out to victims. So people have received some sort of recompense for getting scammed by this guy. He was also indicted in 2017 for a false tax return. He failed to report over $100 million in income, and his tax accountant was also indicted for this. So, I didn't mention it before. Scott Tucker had actually spent a year in prison in the 90s for opening a fake bank. I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically like JP Morgan and Stearns and Chase and Bear. Like, he just mashed together a bunch of real bank names to make his fake bank, and then he gave out fake loans or something. Like, it was just a scam. So, yeah, he's done a lot of financial crimes, is what I'm saying. Finally faced the music. His brothers were involved in the business. One of them passed away. The other one, Joel Tucker, pleaded guilty in July of 2020 to numerous charges, including selling bogus loan portfolios to bill collectors who then tried to collect loans that didn't exist. So that's what I was talking about before, where I could sell a loan to someone else, but he was just selling loans that weren't real. He's currently awaiting sentencing, so I don't know how long he'll be in prison for. Researching this, though, I found like a spider web of connected people who were all involved in payday lending and other payday lending, which again is legal to an extent, but also a bunch of other financial crimes. Like one man who got a bunch of funding to start payday loans, but then it was just a Ponzi scheme and he just kept the money. And then I mentioned before that man who taught Scott Tucker to use Indian tribes. He went to prison in 2018 for very similar crimes. His name is Charles Hallinan. So, good riddance. Unfortunately, despite the strides that were made back in 2016, both in arresting bad players on the scene and scammers, and in adding more regulations to protect consumers from these truly predatory loans, in 2020, under President Trump, the protections that were put in place to protect consumers were gutted. So this happened last July, and given everything else happening in the world, I'm not surprised there wasn't a lot of coverage regarding this, but those protections are gone now until the Biden, if and when the Biden administration puts them back, which takes time. And this explained a little phenomenon I had noticed, which is that new payday lenders are popping up. You might have heard of Upstart, for example, because they've been getting a lot of promotions from popular podcasters and YouTubers. So, like, for example, the McElroy brothers have been doing advertisements for Upstart, which sucks. It's really disappointing because these are predatory lenders. They are, not a good option. They will get you stuck in debt. They will do everything they can to take as much money from you as possible. If you have any other options, do not borrow money from them. If you're thinking like, oh, $500 so I could buy a PS5 would be great, don't. It is much better for your life, for your credit, for your future to just wait. Wait till you have the money for a PS5, because they will try to take you for every dime you have, and that loan, that mark on your credit will follow you for the rest of your life. So that is my warning. I mean, if you are in a jam, I totally understand. It's so frustrating to me that they would gut these regulations at a time when Americans are really struggling, because people need money and people are desperate. And I mean, it is better to go to a pawn shop, it is better to do anything you can to get that $300, $500, whatever it is you need to keep a roof over your head, because predatory lenders, they'll never forget you, and they will never let you forget that debt. So, I mean, I think unless we put the protections back in place, it's only a matter of time, but maybe 15 years before we have another Scott Tucker going to prison. So that is my warning and my sort of pessimistic ending for this video. But at least some people who really took Americans for a ride went to prison and had their money taken away. Okay, so that's it for this week's true crime, white collar crime video. I hope you learned a lot. I have my sources down below in the description box. Let me know what you think, and I will see you again soon.